Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, it's a new year, and I thought what better way to start off the new year than a discussion on AOS 4 and, and talk about how it's going and some of my thoughts on it and so on, and also on Stormcast. And while we do that, I'm going to be painting up this Stormcoven here. They're the new sort of, unit for Stormcast, or one of, and pretty unique little unit, and they have, some key aspects about them which I think are pretty interesting and part of the topic that we'll discuss, because I think they represent something quite cool for this edition moving forward, not just for Stormcast but for other factions as well, to have units like this. And I thought that would be a bit of fun one to talk about, and we'll be doing these up in my usual custom scheme. And I think that'll just be a really fun way to start off 2025. And so I think we should get into it, eh? So it's a new year, new beginnings, and we're starting out with Stormcast here, and something that's been on the channel for a long time for those that have been watching my videos. And I'm pretty happy to be painting this Stormcoven. And why is that? Well, apart from the fact that they're really cool models, and I've wanted to paint them since they were showcased. I think they were for Underworlds first, and then now they're in AOS proper. And they're just a very cool bunch of minis, and I'm going to enjoy adding them to my collection. But there's another reason why I like them, and I think we'll start off with that, about this unit and units like it, and what it represents for this current edition and moving forward, is that this unit has, a very special keyword. It has a wizard keyword, and it's not a hero, it's a unit. And so it comes with, I guess it's a double-edged sword. It gives it some great benefits, but also some negatives too, like it can be targeted because it's not a hero, not an independent character, so it doesn't benefit from some of the hero rules. But it does mean that it doesn't take up the hero slot in your regiments and so on. So it doesn't increase your drop count, basically, in the list writing stage. So it has this really great sort of push and pull benefit of, being added as a unit inside of your regiments and so on, to, keep your drop count low, and then also giving you, hopefully, a cool ability, because wizard or priest sort of keywords on units is pretty powerful. And we have seen this amongst, so we've got a Skaven one as well, and there's a few others that are starting to get this keyword added to them, so wizard or priest or both. And I'm not sure whether there's one with both yet, but anyway, it's a concept that's starting to be presented to the game, and I think that's really important, because the game currently, as we're going to talk about in a minute, to do with list writing, is quite narrow in terms of like what you can fit into your army in a standard sort of 2,000 point game. And so something like this becomes really good, but it does require the spell that's on the unit, and the casting value, and how many spells the unit can cast and so on. All those things become really important as to whether it is in fact a good choice or not. And with Stormcoven, it's on the side of I guess more good than bad. You know what I mean? It's not quite, S tier, sort of the highest tier, sort of, it's always going to be added to your army, but it does represent an interesting list variation, which Stormcast didn't really have access to before. And because of that, that positive side, it also does have a really great spell on it. And that's I think why it really does tip over into that sort of, I guess, B to A tier kind of unit, because it is at a good points cost. That's another thing too. The points are decent for this. I think it's about 210 points as of this video. It might have changed by now, I don't know, but it should be around about 200 points, 210 points, unless there's been an FAQ or a balance update in the time that I've been recording this. But it's at a decent points value, and it does have a really nice war scroll. So it allows for a fight first or strike last effect, depending on who you target, as the spell. And it's at, I think, a casting value of 7. So, and in addition to that, if this unit is on an objective or contesting an objective, I'm pretty sure, they become power level 2. So they get to cast 2 spells instead of 1. So, for all those things, and in addition, it has a kind of ranged shooting attack, this unit has, which is really good to pair with with, let's say, long strikes to increase the damage of long strikes when long strikes are firing, so you could maybe take out a bigger target. Because this spell is quite close range. Now, I can't remember exactly the range. It's either 12 or 18, something like, I think it's 12 inches for that spell. So you'd have to be quite close to target a unit that's going to be in combat, or a combat that's already happening, to do the strike last on an enemy unit. So you're going to need these guys to be quite close. So what kind of function would they be performing? Well, it might be the long strikes dropping in to take out one target, while, you know, another unit, like a cavalry unit, like let's say, Paladors or something like that, are charging in, you know, into another unit, or maybe into a multiple combat there, and you might use, you know, this unit to add its shooting value to, let's say, what the long strikes are targeting, and then maybe cast a spell at the opposing unit that your Paladors are charging, so you can, or on the Paladors to strike first, etc. So depending on how you want to play it. But because it's a spell, you're able to do it in the opponent's turn. And this is something that Stormcast lack, a lot of off-turn abilities. Stormcast are pretty much, you know, reliant on the core rules for their off-turn abilities. They don't really have any innate stuff in their sort of faction rules that allow for a lot of that sort of off-turn kind of abilities, like strike last, strike first, etc. All those sorts of things, which other armies do have access to. So, you know, our finest hour and everything is in our turn. You know, the extremist chamber for strike first, you know, requires you to charge, and then you do a roll, and it's only in your turn. You can't do it in the off turn. So there are a number of reasons why this spell is really powerful, because you can, you know, use that CP to cast in your opponent's turn and get this effect. And so that's really important for this edition. And we'll go into, you know, more reasons why, you know, this edition versus, let's say, third edition maybe in a second. But I think that's a really powerful thing for Stormcast, because they are lacking some of that off-turn ability. And so this does offer you that. So for all those reasons, this is a really, really strong unit for Stormcast. But what it shows more broadly for the game is that, you know, we might see more of these for other factions. As I said, Skaven have already got a similar unit, and we'll probably see more of this sort of thing, where maybe Underworld's warbands get added and given these sorts of keywords like Wizard or Priest, which allow them to become very, very useful, as long as the points are right and the spell is right, into that sort of role of this utility without increasing drop count. So that's a positive addition to the game, and I think that's really exciting for the game, because one of the things that's changed between third edition and fourth edition is you know, a change to list writing and how you construct your army. And you know, a hero essentially is, you know, equaling a drop, basically. There are some exceptions to that, but basically your heroes are making a drop. So that's, you know, your regiments, and then or battalions, or whatever they're called, and then each one is like representing like a group of units that's dropping. So, you know, you don't want to be a high drop generally. When you're talking about playing more competitively, you want it as low as possible. And, you know, third edition was the, you know, the one drop. So everything all in one thing, and it's dropping all at once, and that's your one drop, and that would outplay others. And then now, you know, because of the way the list writing is, it's very hard to do a one drop list. So now most armies are in a two drop list, which is effectively the same thing, right? We're just moving the number from 1 to 2. And so you have 2 drop lists and 3 drop lists generally, where the 2 drop lists are outdropping the 3 drop. And why is this important? Well, you know, if you're new to AOS, on the first turn, before you start the first turn, the one that drops first gets to choose whether they go first or second, and that's really powerful in the game. It's very, very strong. It dictates the flow of the battle. It dictates things like the potential for a double turn into turn 2 or turn 3, etc. It does there's a lot of ramifications for being the one in charge of choosing who goes first. You know, it impacts on the sorts of armies that are playing against each other, you know, your list versus theirs, and how that's going to play out, and whether it's advantageous for you to go second or go first, depending on the type of list you have, and how you want to counter your opponent's list. So there's huge ramifications for being able to choose first turn, which is why everything tries to go down to as low drops as possible. And so that's all fine and well, but one of the things that this current list writing kind of limits is that you don't have a lot of ways to put a lot of sub-characters or smaller heroes into these regiments, because you don't have a lot of slots and you need to fit in your units. So inevitably, you're going to have to increase the drop count to add your heroes in. And that's a bit of a problem. And I think that's one area of the game that I think needs to improve. And so if I'm looking at like a key thing that probably needs to be adjusted slightly, is list writing. I think that list writing is a little narrow right now for AOS 4, and I think that a way to open it up would be to allow for maybe one extra slot for these little sub-heroes, sort of infantry supportive characters, non-unique, 9 wounds or less kind of little on-foot heroes that offer a nice spell or a nice ability that you wouldn't mind adding in, but you don't want to cost an entire drop. You'd love to have them in there, but they're not quite powerful enough to really increase the drop count, because it's going to change the nature of the game or like massively, and their ability that they're bringing isn't good enough to do that. So I'd like to see at least one little slot opened up for these. They sort of did it with Stormcast. You can have a Knight Vexillor, or that other one that no one ever takes, the champion guy or whatever. But that still takes up a slot in the unit slots of the regiment. It's not in its own category, and I think that it needs to have its own little category. Like in 3rd edition, you had a sub-hero slot that's different from the normal unit slots. So just a way to not impede on your regiments, and that would mean you might get a 3rd character in there. So you'd have your 2 main ones, which is what's usually happening right now. You've got some big unique hero that opens up all the different choices for your general's regiment, and then you'll have like a second sort of supportive character as the second drop, and then all your units inside, right? And so this might allow a 3rd little character in there without increasing that, so you can stay competitive. And I think that's really important. You may not want to be a competitive player or whatever, but it still does affect the way the game plays, even if you're not concerned with it. Just the flow of the battle and everything, and the opportunities you have to make choices are still affected, whether you really focus on the competitive side or not. It isn't a part of the game that does get affected. So I think that list writing is really important, and probably one of the key aspects that we all engage in, right? We've got busy lives. I've talked about this before, but like list writing for me is one of the best parts of the game. You can spend hours just writing endless lists and talking to your mates and all that sort of thing, and to make sure that's as open and interesting as possible is really important for the health of the game, because that's what we engage with the most. We write lists way more than we game, and I think that's something that really needs to be focused on, so that the longevity and health of the game lasts for those whole 3 years that it's around. And 3rd edition had that. It was fairly interesting from a list writing point of view. Most armies had a few archetypes, and you could play around a bit, and there was enough room there to make different lists. I know for Stormcast, by the end of 3rd edition, there was like 6 different archetype builds or something. They're all viable and competitive in tournaments. They were winning tournaments and so on. So not every army got that lucky, but there's enough there to continually write new lists. And I think that's an area that's a little bit narrow at the moment, and probably needs some broadening, so that you can actually make those competitive lists and do different archetype builds. So I guess my second sort of observation of the game currently, and I think for the most part, the core rules and everything are fine. I'm totally happy with the way the game has evolved, and that's all good. Like it's still a fun game to play and everything like that. But I think that one area that they could really, they always have to look at this area of the game, because they never really quite get it right. But battle tactics, they just seem to almost get it right every time. There's always just this sort of few nails sticking up, that sort of you get your hand gets stuck on, and they never quite seem to get that right. And I think the battle tactics still need some work, because they still, the battle tactics currently kind of, half of them encourage you to engage with the enemy, and the other half encourage you to just stay away. And I think that's really jarring and creates a really weird dynamic. And it's extremely formulaic. So every single faction right now is basically doing the same thing. And what it's encouraging is, what you're seeing a lot is that there's not as many screens for your units. And now there's another reason for that. Obviously, points costs are higher, so you're not going to have as many screens. But currently, the points that you would normally spend on a screen, which is your little cheap infantry unit or whatever that you put in front to block incoming charges and so on, that sort of really important tactical gameplay positioning thing that you have in tabletop war games, is now getting diverted to these sort of what everyone's sort of calling prospector units, where they're going out to achieve your battle tactics, right? And a lot of them are on the flanks or the sides of the board or over in the other opponent's side, and you need quite quick, fast little units that can do that, and those points are being spent there, whereas normally they would be spent on your screens, where they would be in lines in front of your army to block incoming charges. and so you're not having as many screens. So a very important aspect to tactical play with this game is kind of slightly being lost, not completely, but it's definitely the points are being shifted away. And I think that's kind of that's okay for a short time, but I think ultimately, as the game matures, you'd want to allow for those screens to come back in the game. Now, one other aspect to this is that coherency rules have changed between 3rd edition and 4th edition, and so it's now half an inch next to another model in the unit, so rather than an inch, and that doesn't seem like much when you say it. But, it shrinks down the line of, let's say, a little 5-man unit or a 10-man unit that is designed to be a screen. You can't really string it out very far. So it makes it very hard to block off an incoming charge. And that's kind of a bit sad. Like, I would have rather than just keep the inch. I mean, I know they're obsessed with sort of making the units kind of look like these regiments going to war. But, this is a round-based skirmish style sort of formation game. It's not Warhammer Fantasy where it's all, rank and flank. They have that game now. It's called Old World. These games exist, but AOS is sort of more in the line of 40k where you have these sort of loose formations. So it seemed weird to want to really restrict that size, because that gameplay, that positioning, that movement and blocking and so on is a really, really fun and interesting aspect of the game. And so to limit it a little bit is kind of weird, and pushing the points away from those sorts of units and putting them into these other units to go and take the side of the board where there's nothing there is kind of a little bit strange to me. It just doesn't feel exactly right. So I don't know. I would like to see a development of that coming into the second sort of year or season for new battle tactics. So it'd be really lovely to see a bit more of bringing that back in towards the sort of more, I guess, broader central area of the battlefield where you're actually contesting over objectives and doing things. Like the other half of the battle tactics are okay. They're all fine, but there's just a few in there that are a bit sort of jarring, like take the center. That's a very weird objective. No one should ever do that. You only do that at the end of the game if you happen to be standing in the middle of the board and you can get it anyway, but you should never go for that in the early, like, first turn or second turn. You're just giving away the game. There's very few games where you'll do that on the first turn where you actually win the game. What you're doing is you're just offering your opponent units to take away. You're not even trading in most cases. So it's a very, very bad choice to do in the first turn of the game. It's not really a battle tactic. It's a very strange thing. I don't know. Anyway, that's my own personal opinion. Everyone has a right to their opinion. That's mine. I'm just ranting. But, I would like to see, some development in the battle. That was my second thing that I'd like to see developed over the course of this coming year is, a slight tweak to those battle tactics. And I think that would really improve the game and have those points go back into things like dedicated screens. And hopefully as the points drop over the course of the edition, which they will, that will also free up points as well to be able to pay for those screens. Because I think every army is kind of missing like one unit, like 100 to 120 point unit. We're all kind of missing that. If that was back in the game, I think that would make these army lists feel a lot nicer to play. I think they're sort of missing a unit. I don't know what anyone else thinks, but that's how I feel when I'm writing. I feel like I'm just missing one little unit to help me screen off incoming charges. So it might just because I'm playing Stormcast and that's an elite army and that always struggles with numbers of units and so on, but maybe you don't suffer that with Skaven and so on. But for more elite armies, I feel like we're at least missing one unit. So that would be the second one. And if they develop those two things, so list writing and the battle tactics, I think that would do a lot for the game. And then finally, I guess, as a third, although I'm not really that fussed about it, is manifestations. So yeah, manifestations. I mean, everyone talks about it. I think they do need addressing and sort of a redesign of how it interacts with the game. I think that would be better overall. I don't really mind either way. They're fine, but they're just sort of like an outside element that doesn't really seem to really make much sense for the game. The faction ones are fine. Like they feel like they're part of the faction and part of the faction's identity, and that's great. But the sort of the universal ones feel very out of place, I think, in the game. They don't really feel like anything. They're just this random thing that you get. And I don't really understand why they're there. Like, I understand the faction ones. The faction ones make a lot of sense. I designed my own miniatures, Blight of Gods, and in the future there is a game for it and so on. In the future I'll eventually release that. And I have, spells and effects and things for these factions that are themed, but they're all themed, around the faction that's casting them. So it feels like it's part of the same thing. And for the most part, the faction specific manifestations or endless spells do feel do feel fine and feel part of that faction, and that's great. Like I'm all for that. That's fine for those that love Magic and Wizards. That's a great thing. But the generic ones don't really feel like they're aligned with anything. It feels like I'm pretty sure it comes from a much earlier idea of the game and a much earlier design principle, and it's sort of been tacked on to the modern game, to this 4th edition, or in some cases 3rd edition too, and then now into 4th edition. So I feel like that needs to be addressed a little bit. I think that would be really nice for a lot of people. But the first two definitely, I think, are the main ones. You got your list writing to open up a little bit, and just look at those battle tactics a little more, and make them make a bit more sense for what you're meant to be doing, and allow for hopefully a different choice in those first couple of turns, so that you're not just doing the same pattern every time. So there's at least 3 or 4 different opportunities for a battle tactic in those first couple of turns, so you can mix it up. So every game you're not just going to flanks or taking their enemy terrain or whatever, and both players know exactly what they're doing, and you just kind of, whoever counters it first or whatever gets the tactic and the other person doesn't, and then it goes from there. I'd like to see a little bit of so there's not so, it's not so formulaic, and that would be really great. But otherwise the game is looking really cool, and I'm excited to continue with it. That's no question. And all the guys in my club are still playing, and everything's all still good from that point of view. And in terms of hobby, I mean, I'm still very much enjoying painting the minis. The hobby side of it, the creative side, is still very much in full swing for me. So that the gaming side doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the creative aspects of this hobby, and never has. But I do enjoy it when the game is actually meeting the same kind of enjoyment and expectation that I have for the creative side. Those two things kind of marry up and synergize. It makes the whole experience way more fun, not just for me, but for my opponent, for everything, for the whole thing. So yeah, I think we'll leave that there, and we'll come back to this topic, I guess, later in the year, and see how it's gone when the new season drops, and we'll talk about it again. But it is definitely still a fun game, and I'm looking forward to some more games in the new year, and seeing that new season drop sometime during this year, and getting into it, and seeing how it evolves, because it's still a very fun game, and for me, Stormcast are a great army to paint and collect. So I'm still very much enjoying that. Hopefully, the adjustments as they go over the year improve the opportunities to use the new models, because not all of those new models, as we all know, are particularly viable. Only a few of them are, and it'd be nice to see more of that new range viable as lists, because I'd like to paint them. So it'd be nice to get them on the channel. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. There's a couple there that I'll paint anyway, so they'll go on the channel at some point. But I'd like to see more of the range, viable, so I can feel a bit happier investing, buying all those models and painting them, and that sort of thing, so I get more use out of them, for the games and everything. So that's great. But so we'll see how it goes, and hopefully for everyone else's faction too, that you get the sort of things that you're looking for. And if you've got more comments on this, or you'd like to leave some comments on what you think it'd be nice to see for the game this year, by all means leave them in the comments, and I'll be happy to discuss that with you. That's great, because I'm sure everyone that plays this game has their own strong views on how they see it. We invest so much of our time, personal time and so on, into this thing. We all end up with some kind of opinion on it. So and that's cool. That's part of the fun of this, right? So yeah, I think we'll leave it there. We'll go and see how I've gone with these Stormcoven, and see what they look like. I'm sure it's been fine. I've painted so much Stormcast at this point. I'm sure it's been a pleasure to do it. So let's get into that outro and see how I've gone, eh? And there we go, the Stormcoven, all done. Let's take a look. So yeah, I'm really happy to be adding these to the collection. I mean, I think I've got over 10,000 points now painted, and these are really fun models, so it's great to put them into the collection. At some point this year, I'll do some kind of, showcase video or something like that, and see them all together. That'll be pretty cool. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, so it's a great start to the year. So yeah, just some thoughts on AOS and how it's going, and how it will go hopefully into 2025, and hopefully some of those suggestions that I put forward might come to pass. Or even better ones that I haven't thought about, that sort of thing. It'll be interesting to see anyway what GW does with the game, and how it progresses. But yeah, it should be interesting anyway. They always do good minis for these for AOS, and it'll be fun to see how it goes anyway. So I'll leave a nice image for these at the end, as I normally do in the paint list. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit the like button, subscribe button, it really helps me out. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.